Freedom of speech is foundational for any kind of democratic movement. You cannot have a democracy without freedom of speech because you can't you lose the ability to share differing ideas. And if you can't do that civilly, then you don't have a democracy. You have some form of authoritarianism. Every action taken by governments worldwide, I mean, not just Canada, not just the United States, but globally, have been taken to divide populations that traditionally were more unified, that shared cultural touchstones and points in time that we could all recall. We had shared knowledge that has been slowly excised from the general population. We used to also call that common sense. That's all storytelling was. Storytelling often is a parable, a way of pursuing uh, uh, communicating culture. And so storytelling is one of the most important ways to do that. And so that's why people got involved in the culture war, people like me and others, because we were losing those touchstones. If you don't have a moral standard, what are you going to replace that with? And so as you suggested, having a consistent moral foundation is probably the basis for civilization as we know it.
Thank you so much to Culture Casino for sitting down with us because I'm on a panel with him on WDW Pro every other Thursday, and I'm very grateful to be so. But now I'm really grateful to be able to speak with him about more broader subjects. And also, during one of those panels, I was surprised he knew so much about Canada and Alberta's independence. So having a US perspective will be very interesting.
Well,
Hey,
you not only knew about it, you defended Alberta
Yes.
independence pretty vigorously. I was put a smile on my face, brother.
well, it's easy to do. I kind of see a lot of the independence reflected in a lot of the states in the United States. A lot of states are feeling really being like they're being attacked, kind of like Alberta is as a province. The entire country of Canada is being essentially supported through your economic efforts, and they don't give you any recompense or equal recompense for what you provide. And that's a tragedy. And that's again, it's something we're trying to solve, in various states around our country. And I'm watching it in real time. I'm watching not just Alberta, but perhaps Saskatchewan and maybe some northern territories. It would be kind of a neat thing to be able to drive from my neck of the woods all the way up to, the very tippy top of your country, which I think is beautiful. I love that up there.
But
So,
before we go further, and because I like
yeah.
to put it at the front, where can people find you?
Oh, yeah, you can find me, here at the Culture Casino main channel on YouTube and Rumble, and I stream on X, and I have, Minds and Getter and other I mean, I'm pretty much everywhere under Culture Casino. Other than that, you can find me on the same shows that Nat frequents, and you can find me on another channel where I focus on gardening. It's called, That Garden Place, and I love doing that. That's just some of the funnest, stuff that I have. Now that I'm retired, I have the time, so I'm enjoying it. So
And you can find all of those links down below. So please do go follow him because his content is very interesting and also very prescient to the time. I think you do these 6 minute rundowns with news and what's happening. And
yeah.
I know when we were doing a more geopolitical show, we used to always watch it to know what was going on right at the top of the day. So thank you for that as well.
You bet. I love doing that show, and I do that on weekdays, and it's called the 6 Minute Daily, but that's kind of a lie because sometimes it'll be an hour or more. But yeah, but the news portion's 6 minutes, and of course I cover everything global politics and news as well.
And just to start, if people don't know you, what's the 3,000 foot overview of how you got to have that many channels and that many appearances and the
Oh,
interests that you cover?
yeah, no, well, I've always had a diverse set of interests. I've grew up that way. It seems like the conversation around the family dinner table when we all got together was as broad as you could possibly think. We talked about chemistry and paleontology and all kinds of other things at the kitchen table. So the conversation was always a high level, and it didn't matter what portion of my family I was hanging out with or visiting with. The conversation was always higher level than probably a lot of people experience. It wasn't how was school today kind of conversations, although that was there. It was more centrally focused on broader issues, and then so I've always had the broadest possible overview of things. So to step back for me, I got into this because something was not right and it wasn't right in so many different places. And I think, I think you guys can probably relate to that. Wasn't looking at the world I grew up in. I wasn't looking at, I was looking at a lot of finger pointing and name calling and things that were disassociated from reality. And so a lot of people being called racist who certainly weren't, a lot of situations that were, putting people at odds with each other instead of, unifying us, which is again something I like to build coalitions. I'm a coalition builder. I like to build, groups of people together to accomplish things. And so stepping back, I saw it most prevalently and in the most pronounced way in pop culture and entertainment. So when I was, studying that, I'd started to happen upon a lot of the people that are in, I guess, my sphere or our sphere, I would like to refer to it as, and made some friends with some of them, like Gary from Nerdrotic and Ryan Cannell, and I kind of look at those. Gary, I look at as a peer because we're old, but I look at Brian as like maybe possibly one of my kids, and and some of the younger ladies that participated in streams, and just kind of that group of people I fell in with. Drunk 3PO being one of them. Jay's a brilliant guy. He's also your Canadian bear mascot from time to time. But, honestly, they kinda were hitting in on the conversations that I wanted to have. And so right about the time that, the global crisis kicked off, that, we learn more about every day, and none of it sounds better. But right about that time, we started to intercommunicate in a way that allowed us to, like, I hung out with Miss Martin Muses, who still maintains her channel today, but not as aggressively as she used to. But we used to do live daily briefings about what was happening from the inside. And because of some family connections I had some inside knowledge coming out of Johns Hopkins specifically. So I could kind of update people on what was happening day to day, and what the numbers looked like and where the cases were coming from and things like that. And so we just kind of had a daily podcast about that. Nothing but factual information so we couldn't get in trouble. Nobody was speculating or offering up opinions that they couldn't support because they didn't have the credentials. And we this is the time when they were starting to police language around services, authoritative sources, and things like that. So it's like they wanted you to use the UPI and the AP because they were very well controlled as the newswire services, and there were other sources to go and get actual information. So but that's how I got into it, and then it just kind of naturally evolved from there because I fell into my niche because I like talking about TV and film and how it used to be versus how it is now, and I have some contacts and people inside, and I have friends that worked for Disney. None of them do now. They all are gone. And I had friends that were working in the film industry. I still have one friend up in Canada in the film industry up there, running a company that helps these productions, not directly with individual studio. And then it was all downhill from there or uphill from there. I don't know. It seems like a climb so far just to get to where, my channel is approaching 50,000, but it's been a lot of fun. The most important thing to me, and I'm sure you guys will find this too, and probably are since your live streams are, so well visited. I would say that it's the communication, the intercommunication with the audience that gives us a distinct advantage every day, and a sense of connection that I think a lot of people um, don't feel, right?
And also, while a lot of people that focus on politics or talk or just want to know the news and politics might scoff in a way at culture or the culture wars and say, "Oh, that's not important," I do coincide with Rush Limbaugh, the great Rush Limbaugh, that used to say politics is downstream from culture, and it is very important to know what's going on culturally because in a lot of ways we see things happening there before we see them happening on the stage of politics and how it influences politics as well. So in your view, why is it important to care about the film, the TVs, the movies, the culture war in general, and how they've been affected in the last, I would say, 20 years?
I think the biggest if you were going to damage control it, I think the biggest problem is that we don't have a shared or a unifying culture, and it was done intentionally again to divide every action taken by governments worldwide. I mean, not just Canada, not just the United States, but globally, have been taken to divide populations that traditionally were more unified, that shared cultural touchstones and points in time that we could all recall. We had shared knowledge that has been slowly excised from the general population. We used to also call that common sense. So a shared understanding of what is right and wrong existed. We had high trust societies in the West, and I think those are all like part of the same situation. When you look at how culture is influenced, not just in your individual country, but your culture is an import outport kind of a business. And in the United States, we were exporting far more culture, very much through the '80s. If you recall the Reagan years, we were farming out Western culture, and the unfortunately the Bushes took the thousand points of light and the ideas of freedom across democracy across the world, and kind of perverted it during a period of time, and that wasn't discovered obviously until later. Everything sounds great as a soundbite, but the problem is if you take it at face value, that just soundbite, that's not the entire thinking or the principle of the communication that you're receiving. And so, like I said, and you referenced that, Rush Limbaugh. I listened to that guy every single day when I was running my first company. He was like he followed me around, whether it was on my way to school. I went to college, and even high school. I mean, this guy was my lunch break. He was my after school stuff. And then, of course, later on, Andrew Breitbart, of course, who actually I believe is the one that coined the phrase that you referenced that Rush used to quote regularly. But we've lost too many people that were too important too quickly to actually be able to digest everything they would have had to offer. And I refer to obviously Charlie Kirk as one of those people. Um, so I mean, pop culture is so important. I mean, everybody knows, Battlestar Galactica. Everybody knows, I think our last major point of cultural reference would be Game of Thrones, before things started to really shatter. But you started to see the telltale signs creep over into various media areas where people wanted to be of influence in fields that were not necessarily adjacent to, what they believed at the time, but what they wanted to change. They wanted to be activists as they moved into their employment period. A lot of that was forced because a lot of people were getting degrees and things that are absolutely valueless, I believe. So, well, I mean, there's gender studies degrees. Well, what are you gonna do with that? That's not it's the what, you gonna become a social worker? I mean, you don't have the credentials to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. You're not credentialed in a way that you can go and get like an HVAC job or anything else that I would recommend to young people now. Trades are gonna be more valuable than a lot of these intellectual pursuits. That's not to say you shouldn't be reading or doing things like that. It's just to be more honest about what it is that makes money in the world. So anyway, because of that, like I said, because of a lot of the dissolution of the common language, the common experience, the common culture, um, these people work their ways into places they shouldn't be: video games, comics, all of that. So we started to see around somewhere starting between 2003 and 2008, we started to see a shift in the way employment was approached. Um, and then we got to about 2012, and comics were completely starting to break down, and the storylines no longer followed the traditional hero's journey or any of the other things that, again, are familiar and have been familiar in storytelling since ancient times. I mean, whether or not you believe in, Sphinxy as a character on Egyptian hieroglyphs or not, or any of the other things from way back when, you still had heroes and villains. You had the gods, both good and bad in mythology. And that's all storytelling was. Storytelling often is a parable, a way of pursuing uh, uh, communicating culture. And so storytelling is one of the most important ways to do that. And so that's why people got involved in the culture war, people like me and others, because we were losing those touchstones. And look, everybody can point at Ghostbusters 2015 and go, "This is the point." Well, sure, but it had already happened. Things were already being perverted so that they could pervert them more in the future. And I think a lot of media companies are now coming to grips with the fact that you can have all the messaging you want, but doesn't mean people are going to buy it. And unlike, countries like China and other places where, um, there's forced consumption, right? Because it gets you your good social credit score so you can still eat. But, we don't have that. I don't know about Canada yet. I mean, maybe that's coming in your future. I don't know. I hope not. But, at least here in the States, I mean, I'm not forced to consume things. I go and watch things. One of the pieces of content, as you guys know, I make on my channel, is usually box office related. I usually have a box office video, and I review films. I will review a film. I'll even review books. I haven't got to do any recently, but I'll review a film and I'll tell you what it's like, what it is, and what likely is the outcome of it. It's pretty easy to predict, what's going to be successful and what isn't, what's going to be, held in high regard and what won't. And I think right now, I think all of us would agree with this conversation, and I think all of us have talked about it before. Star Wars is not held in high regard anymore, and that is my entry point into big culture, because the original Star Wars film, A New Hope, showed up in 1977, and guess who was there? This kid, this kid that's sitting here now. I was too young to go see it because of its rating, but I got taken anyway. In fact, I got taken more than 12 times to see that film in its first year of release. I was obsessed. If whenever I had extra lunch money or chore money or whatever, I was like, "Look, I'll pay for your ticket. I want to go that bad." And tickets were cheap back then. I mean, comparatively, what you earned back in the day, um, bought you a lot more. It's the same gold coin analogy. You can have a $50 gold coin in 1920, and that $50 gold coin would go and buy you a Brooks Brothers suit. Well, believe it or not, that same $50 gold coin now, because of the value of gold, would still buy you the same Brooks Brothers suit. But fiat currency, which is what both of our countries utilize now, is made up money. It's controlled by a central bank on hopes and dreams. It's not actually backed by something. In this country, the only thing worth money, in my opinion, that is worth it to own is land, because you're not making any more of it. And I think if you don't control the land, your own natural resources, your water rights, mineral rights, etc., you don't really control anything. That's not true independence. So, and again, it's why I reference Canada so often, especially Alberta. I'm like, the engine of the economy exists in one province, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's spread in a few others, but Alberta's you guys have untapped resources that are hundreds of years worth of productivity. And don't be like, this is the bigger countries I call out, like Germany. I'm like, Germany was Europe's engine until they decided to become globalists and participate in the WEF, et cetera, et cetera. And the lady running that disaster right now is a hot mess, and the current Chancellor Merz of Germany is a fool. But set all that aside, um, Germany was the industrial center, and then they took all of their power plants offline. They stopped relying on fossil fuels and everything, all the proven things that would keep them driving everything forward. They were perfectly happy to disassemble, and I'm hoping here in the United States and in Canada that stops happening, and we reverse course.
Well,
Yeah.
it's very interesting that you said property is the one thing worth owning in the States. And a lot of people feel like that gives you freedom, which I grew up half my life in Canada, half in the States. And that's always what I thought. In Canada now, we see private property rights are not only under attack, they're being taken away on a federal level and on a provincial level, with giving almost the entire city of Vancouver and the lower mainland away to First Nations tribes. So now private property, if you own a piece of property within that area, people are wondering, do they still own it? Is the title even worth anything? Because the courts seem to have ruled against private property in Canada now. I don't even know in 5 or 10 years if you're going to be able to own property, or is it going to be like China where owning property means you're leasing it for 99 years?
Yeah, that's a real problem. We don't even have that issues with our Indian tribes. We instead granted those tribes land out of some kind of white guilt at the time. I'm still one of those people that's adversarial to that concept. I don't understand it. You can't feel guilty for something that you didn't do. If you understood the nature of, in our country, we call them Indians. It's because we thought we were arriving on the West Indies, but we didn't. Anyway, set that aside. So the American Indian populace certainly was taken advantage, but if you know the history of those particular tribes, you understand that they made war upon each other and took over each other's land and resources and everything else. And they didn't have an idea of ownership, which left them open to the concept of ownership that we were trying to build in our country at the time. So were you, by the way. I don't know what changed your guys' minds, but you're not. No time in my lifetime am I going to participate in any kind of a land acknowledgement or any of the other stuff that you guys are forced to do on the regular. To me, you are the people who are still descendants of those folks. They are conquered people. They don't have claims to any of that anymore, and that happened hundreds of years before you had any influence over it. Not just in this country, but I think at least 180 years ago for you guys. So
And that's how it started. It started with the land acknowledgements and
yeah.
with forgetting why it's important to continue down the path that they were going down with Western and building what continuing to build Western culture. And on that point, is there any pivotal moment when you saw that shift, or do you remember a specific moment when you said, "Oh, it's all lost. We're losing Western culture to this facsimile of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to wokeness, and to all of these new people coming through the universities and telling us that everything we've stood up for in the West is wrong."
I think, well, I mean, uncontrolled migration is a different conversation that's a little farther down the road. But if I were to back up, I would say the minute that like we were creating degrees so that athletes could to participate in sports, in at university level. For us in the United States, that one of the reasons that people believed, and this was actually in an HBO special called Real Sports, I think at the time it had a Bryant Gumbel or one of the Gumbles, whichever the less popular one was. That was his show on HBO, and they talked about the creation of these degrees like gender studies. Gender studies was a, believe it or not, it just in fact is pretty worthless in my opinion because there's no job, but it was one of the things that the athletes would go into because they could get an easy grade. They could get an easy grade, an easy degree, and they didn't have to go and pursue a lot of other things that would have made them smarter in the long run. So, I feel bad for them for taking the easy route, but maybe that was their only way out of their bad situation, here. Professional sports is a big deal in the United States, as you guys know. You have your own professional sports teams. I'm a big admirer of many of them. I've talked a little bit in the background with you guys about hockey and growing up with hockey. And, but I'll just say this, I really I really think that moment where Western education was compromised at a university level, and they started to, shift to bringing in foreign students and these bad ideas, um, I think that was the point in time where I started to recognize there were some very bad things happening in higher education, and it only got worse from there because this is the only place you can succeed without actually producing anything is inside of the academia. And that's why teachers never get fired. That's why we end up with these ideas of tenure. Well, you're not really producing anything, but we're guaranteed a job forever. No, 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 no. That's exactly the opposite of what we should be promoting. I think again, this was definitely a warning sign to me. And I look back on my education and the degree that I got and how the value of it changed over time because obviously some of the knowledge was replaced with newer information and updated facts and things like that. That while in the old days everything I learned was true and worked, as you get farther separated from that, it becomes less relevant to what's happening in the world now. and it should. I mean, that's 30-year-old information. Of course, it's, out of date. So we're always learning, which is why nothing is ever settled. If I ever hear the word settled science again, I'm going to vomit. So those two words should never be used together. I mean, our current understanding of things, that should be how we should phrase stuff like that. But our current understanding of this is this. That way you can be wrong, but you can do it with style because you can be right. Again, you may have been right then, but you didn't have all the information. So I don't know, just the way the world works. And again, it comes down to communication, right? It's why I oftentimes use more words than I should. I use a broader vocabulary because I believe that the way you provide accurate information is by selecting your language carefully. And while I sometimes misuse words, everybody does. I always want to convey the point.
Well, maybe I'll get an American perspective, and you might have a completely different outlook on this because in Canada, I'm I wouldn't say I'm non-religious. I have a belief, but I wouldn't say I'm a Christian. That being said, during the Jibby Jab era, what happened? I realized the absolute need for a non-moving moral foundation, and
Yeah,
how the West there was an attack on Christianity, and that was
yeah,
being eroded. And there's been over 200 church burnings in Canada. They'll take away your nonprofit status as a church if you're not pro-abortion as a church, which is insane to me. But this war on Christianity, I think the government almost wants to get rid of religion so it can dictate what the morals are and constantly shift those. Now, in the States, there's much more of a Christian foundation that's still preserved. But well, what are your views on that?
no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm a faithful person. I am a Christian. I have no trouble identifying as one. When I was about 15 or 16, I had considered becoming a diaconal minister for my faith at the time. I did, and I pursued obviously other interests, and I found more than religion. I found a life and a partner. But the idea, the foundational system on which the United States was founded was an understanding of Christianity. It didn't have to be a particular sect or faith. It was just the idea that we acknowledge one God and a faithful base in everything that we do. If you don't have a moral standard, what are you going to replace that with? And so as you suggested, having a consistent moral foundation is probably the basis for civilization as we know it. And one of the people who understood that even more than probably anybody, well, in my era, would have been Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk understood moral foundation as the center of from which all else came. And you have to have an ability to judge success and failure, and you have to understand how you move forward from that. And a lot of times, religious texts are show up as parables. I talked about this a few moments ago in the culture section, but it's equally as true in faith. You cannot teach a lesson without a story, and that story has to convey principles and pathways to redemption or to success, overcoming failure. All of that comes out of religious texts. It doesn't matter which religion. In this case, I'm going to talk about Christianity, but here in the States and even in Canada, you guys had faith. I don't know what happened, but it's again, the world I grew up in is unrecognizable to me today. So and that's what I fight against every day. I mean, again, one of the reasons I do a news program, and you guys do as well, is so that people have accurate shared information. I think that there's nothing more important than that.
And currently, we're also seeing in Canada, and you've spoken a bit about it, well, quite a bit about it in the US and also in Canada, but we're seeing pushes for further censorship within Canada, Bill
Yeah.
C9, Bill C22, and a bunch of other ones as well. But with the US, right now, and in US politics, we're seeing a little bit of a relaxing, I would say, of the censorship that we saw a few years ago when there was a Democrat in office. But what right now gives you either hope or concern about the direction that the US specifically might be headed with censorship and then within censorship in the entertainment industry.
Well, and I'll say one other thing before you answer. And I say US politics, and especially when it comes to freedom of speech, has a huge impact on the entire West
Mhm.
and
Yep.
especially Canada. And that's one of the reasons we're asking your perspective on especially what direction the US is going to go.
Freedom of speech is foundational for any kind of democratic movement. You cannot have a democracy without freedom of speech because you can't you lose the ability to share differing ideas. And if you can't do that civilly, then you don't have a democracy. You have some form of authoritarianism. Censorship is the tool of the authoritarian. So if you want to point the fingers and assign symbols to people, and call them words from 1940s Germany, you're the one that is in support of censorship. Sorry. I just went Canadian on you there. Sorry, but I'll just say it that way, and it's the truth. I believe in this again. If I were president, I believe that the West, if any Western nation or a nation that describes themselves as having Western values, I believe that if any of them decide to pursue censorship in any form or fashion, they would no longer have a reciprocal relationship with the United States. I think if we were to draw such an absolutist line, I think not only would that lead the globe, and it would broaden the understanding of what actual freedom and democracy is. Because again, you cannot have democracy without the right to express yourself in any way. Whether or not you agree with what somebody says, that's a whole other thing. And that's the problem. They want to force agreement by controlling language. I don't believe that. I believe that you can convince people to share your opinion, and that's what free speech is for. No one has demonstrated that better than the comedian that we see, Dave Chappelle. I mean, comedy is from whence all mockery comes. If you lose your ability to be able to mock, whether it be pictorially like with memes, or using words, you lose the ability to critique or to call into question somebody else's perspective. And I think that's incredibly valuable in any kind of democratic society. You have to be able to take a look at somebody's idea and point out where the failings are. It's pretty easy in a lot of the Canadian policies of late. You also, you had oh man, what was his name? I always want to call him Castro Jr.
Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau.
Trudeau. Thank you. Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney are examples of what is very wrong with what is going on in Canada. In my opinion, as an American. Okay, I'm just be very clear there. Yeah, I'm not going to suggest you guys share my thoughts on that, nor would I press you on it because again, you guys are being controlled by censorship. But here in America, I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say. So.
And I mean, that is why, literally, Castro Jr., Justin Trudeau, is why we escaped Canada,
Well,
because we escaped under his regime, because we wanted to be able to speak out and speak out specifically about what's going on in Canada. So that is why we're now, I mean, I am Mexican, but that is why we're now in Mexico.
and people just look at Trudeau like he's some far left ideologue and he doesn't know what's really going on and there's air in his head. The truth of the matter is, his father was one of the founding members of the Club of Rome. And he was raised very specifically to do exactly what he's doing. And I don't think he was as knowledgeable as somebody like Mark Carney. Mark Carney is literally one of the architects behind a lot of what's going on within globalization and things like that. So
Mhm.
Mark Carney is far more concerning than even Justin Trudeau was to me. And I
Yeah.
really hope his plan of trying to wait Trump out fails dramatically.
Well, we'll know more when we have our midterms here in the United States, which I believe are going to go rather positively for Team Red. The Orange Man bad, or the party of the Orange Man. He's not bad, but uh, I have a feeling that if it does go as well as I hope, there will be no turning back. And I think that's what the other party in this country, the Democrats, are very very concerned with. Again, I mean, if you're a person of faith, you kind of want to root for everybody doing well rather than just specific people doing well. There is no justice in make goods because you can never make anything good. what was lost cannot be recovered in that situation, which is another reason why I'm one of those big believers, as you illustrated, in own things. I believe in the idea of ownership. And I think that the idea that you will own nothing and you'll be happy is complete and utter hogwash, which is why that guy lost his gig at the WEF. And, it's why Ursula's likely going to lose her gig. And I think you're going to watch a lot of EU countries walk away from the EU. And they're going to wish they'd done it at the same time that the Brits forced the issue. Of course, it's odd. The Tories forced that on Britain at the only time they could have before it would have been locked in, and now you just had a revolutionary election in in the UK, which I do. They transferred power to the tune of 1,400 into the reforms shelter, and then you had the new party over there gained 10 seats. They went for 10 seats. They gained 10 seats. So you now really have the elimination of the Tories and the slow dwindling death of the Labor Party over there. And I mean, now you just have the LD party, which I think is liberal democracy or liberal Democrats, and the Greens, which are a waste of space, in my opinion.
You've also talked a lot about Canada and worrying things like the MAID program, for example, and other
Yeah.
things that raise Americans' hairs in the back of their neck. And we see a few other American content creators using Canada almost as a mirror to say to Americans, "Hey, we don't want to become this. That we don't want to get to the point where they are at, and we have to do everything possible to step away from that." A few examples would be Glenn Beck or Steven Crowder as
Yes.
well, using Canada as that mirror. So, do you think it's important for Americans to know a bit more about what's going on in Canada, and what is the best way to communicate it to Americans?
Can I add a quick statistic there?
Sure.
Sorry,
Yeah.
more people are being euthanized in Canada than cats last year. It's extremely concerning.
It is extremely concerning, and it ties right back into a previous point that we were talking about, which is we've lost touch with humanity because we've lost touch with God. And again, I'm a faithful person, and you do not have to share my faith, but we can understand that if you don't have a moral foundation, you're gonna go to those types of lengths. I mean, some of these situations have occurred that weren't even morally sound. People that had said, "I don't want this to happen anymore." I'd been talked into this by people. I was in a weakened state. I was in a state of mind that had and had been subjected to a lot of pressure in order to do this, and I feel like, if the minute you say, "You know what, this ain't happening." And if your government can't even recognize that and wants to move ahead, then they're heck bent. I'll be as kind with words as I can be, but they're going to be heck bent on making this happen, whether you elect to not do it, in the end. I think that's morally reprehensible and dangerously similar to what happened in Germany in the 40s. Because at that point, you're committing a war crime. Sorry, I actually believe that that program is devoid of any human compassion whatsoever. And if you try to give me, the compassion argument, I'm gonna fight back hard.
And I think when we talked on recently, when we talked on the WDW Pro show about Alberta independence, because I try to bring it up as often as I can because that's what we're pushing for,
Oh, yeah.
you were
Yeah,
very
I want
knowledgeable.
you guys to be an independence. I mean, it would be great to have Alberta as a state, but, you guys have a completely different philosophy than the United States. You wouldn't fit in well with our two-party weird system that we've got now. And despite the fact that your population's equally divided, male and female, you are one of the few provinces or eventually independent countries or city states, I would hope to call you. I don't know what we would call you. You will be a weird independent government, but if you are able to do this, you have a 50-50 breakdown in male and female. That is unheard of. It's usually weighted on one side or the other, usually with more ladies than men. So that's insane. But I think I talked with you guys ahead of our conversation here that you've grown so phenomenally much as a country, but most specifically Alberta. You went from like 1.5% of the population just a few years ago to like 12% or nearly 12% of the population of the entire country. That's how big Alberta's grown. I had no idea you guys were running up close to 5 million people in that province. So if you were able to break off and take advantage of all the amazing opportunities that you have, especially with your natural resources, we would get back to making real timber frame homes. We wouldn't be utilizing a lot of metal and things like that, aluminum studs and things like we are using in commercial construction here in the United States. We could go back to timber fully for everything. There'd be plenty of it. And you guys are really good stewards of your forestry programs. You replanted about the same rate that you were, selectively picking up trees. I love all these ideas, especially the oil. I think between your resources in the United States resources, the Western economies, and Western growth would increase exponentially. And I think other countries would reverse a lot of these globalist policies because of it. Sorry, it's easy for me to support Alberta because I was always like, well, they're really kind of United Statesy, you know?
Well, Trump put out a plan for the Western Hemisphere and it was pretty phenomenal, but we see it actually being enacted here in Central America and Mexico and South America. And let me tell you, it is working. It's severely underreported what's actually going on in
Well,
these
it's great stuff. It's great stuff. I mean, everything. Unfortunately, you guys still have some corruption in the government structures in Mexico, and I won't get too much into that because we're Canadian focused today. But down even more south, right, Central America and South America, I'm watching like active restructuring and reinvestment in everywhere. I mean, absent Brazil's insanity for whatever happened there, they went from being an industrious country and full of a lot of wealth. They still had the ghettos up there and everything else in the hills, especially in oh my gosh, Rio. But the they were on the right track. I mean, I used to get annoyed because of all the Brazilian tourists at Walt Disney World. So, because they had so much wealth, everybody there was like just tons of money coming out of there, and somehow they got corrupted by politics is seems to be the thing and globalist ideas and control under China. That's the other problem. And then you end up with what happened to them. But everywhere else is recovering well. All it took was to get Maduro out of Venezuela, and all of a sudden we have American investment coming back, and you're going to see the refineries start to operate with more efficiency. The investment, all of those oil companies and all those refineries and everything else all that infrastructure was U.S. because we were the ones investing in it way back when. Venezuela can get back to becoming a mass producer of not just oil but other resources. Venezuela has a lot. I mean, I can go into great detail in places like Chile and stuff like that, and start to talk about the opportunities to come correct in the future. But honestly, I think that you're right. What you were saying is just like Canada can use what's happening there and kind of see the roadmap for what we want to do in this hemisphere. This hemisphere needs to remain in Western control, and it needs to do so with democratically elected people. And we need to move farther away from parliamentary systems, which can be easily corrupted. Um, we need to get rid of the foreign influence in this hemisphere. And when I say that, I'm talking specifically about China and the UK. Unfortunately, Canada is influenced by the UK still, whether or not they want to admit it. I mean, you have Her Majesty and His Majesty on your money. So tell me you're not affiliated in some way with them. You understand my point though is I think that's the right direction. I think you were specifically leaning into it, and I couldn't agree more.
Well, everybody's on board with it. Even a president like Claudia Sheinbaum, who's the far left ideologue, behind the scenes is cooperating
Yeah,
economically and militarily.
yeah.
Mark Carney seems to be the freaking standout that he is willing to go down with the globalist ship at all costs. And now we see Alberta trying to gain their independence. But if Carney keeps heading in this direction, we could see a reaction trigger between there's currently four separate provinces that want independence.
come on down. Look, I mean, like you said, I mean, I don't understand how that would work governmentally as far as making states, and I don't have any interest in that. I think you guys could be unified as the Canadian states or whatever you wanted to call yourselves, right? And I think that would be to your benefit. But it would also give us the ability to work together in a way that has been controlled by some really unfavorable politicians that I feel bad about. And I can say some positive things about Claudia, but boy, she seemed to run away when she thought she might be Maduro'd. So I wonder why. Wonder why she was so worried about that. I mean, does she have ties to some nefariousness? I mean, I wouldn't suggest that.
I would,
Well, Trump's
because I
also
know.
Trump's also fantastic with her because he realizes she's got a far left base. He
Yeah.
lets her talk all kinds of crap in the public as long as she's cooperating behind the scenes. It's good for Mexico. It's good for the U.S.
Monroe Doctrine, yeah.
Exactly. It's the Monroe Doctrine. A lot of people don't understand that. And look, I'm a manifest destiny guy, but that's a whole other conversation, right? And again, when you always believe that you have the right, you have the right. Been given a divine destiny. I get it. But no, I think that's true. And let me back that up with something else in this country, we have opposing views, and up until very recently in our political history, it was a conversation. You go out, you have you have a beer with friends. You don't have to agree on stuff. Like I have some really radical friends that are in great support of some bad policies when it comes to young people and bad policies when it comes to tolerance of insanity, right? I think controlling insanity is important, and I think we need to open up the institutions again. But Ronald Reagan got rid of them. I don't know if they're ever coming back. But anyway, but even on our courts, in the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, um, conversations could happen between Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? So these people were civil with each other and friendly with each other. They go out to dinner, they would hang out together, their families would see each other. But there's no room for that in the you're with me or you're against me ideology of the extreme left. And that's the same thing that the UK is suffering from. It seems to me like some Canadians are suffering from that as well. And there's no room for growth. There's no room for opportunity. There's no room for anything if that's your attitude about it. These are my personal beliefs. I'm not saying that you guys would agree with them. It's just my thoughts.
Oh no, but I fully agree. And
Yeah.
also, right now, when we're talking about Alberta independence, and I'm sure you see it reflected in the US as well, and you've traveled to a bunch of places and a bunch of different times, and I'm sure you saw those changes too. But right now, we've been talking about a lot about how to get the independence conversation into cities. And unfortunately, still a lot of people within the movement have one way and one perspective to get that message and convey that message out there. But for you and seeing that divide between rural and city, would you have any suggestions as to how to get into cities with appropriate messaging that works for the cities versus the rural? Because we already have the rural, essentially.
Well, it's conversations like these. I mean, and you have to go. You have two populous centers. You have two major cities in Alberta, right? Calgary and oh,
Edmonton.
my brain just turned off.
Edmonton.
Edmonton, yeah, because the Oilers, right?
Yeah.
So sorry, my brain still works in hockey mode. So that it just is what it is. But honestly, that's what you have to do. You have to take it to university campuses. You have to Turning Point USA this conversation. And it's going to be hard. There's no easy about that. You have to be so solid on every point you're going to make. You need a personality or a cult of personality like Charlie Kirk. You need an evangelist for the movement. You need a single point of focus that is willing to take all the heat. And for a lot of us, and for me especially, Charlie kind of centered a lot of quality thinking, and I don't think that exists in this conversation. Maybe it does. Maybe you have a town hall, somebody that can walk into a room and do that. But I think you need to have these conversations, and I think they need to be genuine. I think they have to allow for a back and forth. I think that should be supported by your current government structure. Oh my gosh, the lady's name always falls out of my head. Um, oh goodness. Oh,
Daniel Smith?
thank you. Yes. Oh, yeah. She needs to be at the forefront of of maybe even hosting some of these conversations, not being the spokesperson for it, but to be in that presence so that they are secure environments with the ability to have civil conversation. And for anybody that wants to pop off wild and pull their bullhorns out and jump up and down in a pink pig's costume, fine, except we're going to show you out. And this is for civil conversations, not radical weirdness, right? You want to do that, start a YouTube channel or whatever. But honestly, I think that's what you have to do, plus what you guys are doing every single day. It's the conversation about this and why it has to happen, all of the various reasons that it has to happen, and all the various policies and procedures that have happened to get you to that realization. I think being able to draw the line, as you led me through this interview, from when did this start to when did it get to its worst point to what was the apex for you. eh, Everybody's going to have a different story. It's to connect with that story. So for some folks in Canada, it's like, well, we lost our jobs. Well, why? We lost our jobs because the companies left. But why? Because these fiscal policies and this idea is we're going to fight tariffs with tariffs, which never should have been there in the first place. I think the conversation between Carney and, well, even Trudeau, and Trump, prior to Carney, kind of put it into perspective. You can't have $100 million disparity every single year. That doesn't seem quite right between people who are supposed to be friends and neighbors. Um, I think you grow better and you get more foreign investment if you offer them something that's of equal value. And I think American and Canadian friendship is important. I mean, and I think when it comes to Saskatchewan, I think they don't feel like they're represented in the government in a fair way. Somebody tell me in an argument, and I'll read the comments, guys. By the way, somebody give me an argument for how that isn't a fair way to look at it. I mean, Ottawa gives you everything they've got. Saskatchewan, I mean, I can say, look, I can carve up your country really nicely into a United States of New Canada or whatever you guys want to call yourselves. But I'd be all for it. And I would support you, and I would try to influence politicians to negotiate deals and everything else that would be lucrative for both sides. But both parties need to get value out of something, and I don't think America has been appreciated as a value partner for what they are, and that's okay. I mean, I'm American, I have a bias, but at the same time, I think America's been taken advantage of not just by Canada, but by their other partners in Europe. I think the EU, through organizations like NATO, which I think should be demolished, removed, removed from the conversation. I think if you want American military in your country, you ask for it. And I think if you value the military bases and the ability to have instant defense and everything else, then you deal with America fairly. And if you don't, I'm not going to be there when the bully comes over to pick on you. And it's the same thing with Canada. I'm like, well, you guys let China in. That's not good. I'll do that.
Let me ask you a quick question, and I'll
Yeah.
just see if you know this or not from an American perspective, because the Canadians want to complain that, oh, Trump wants to put tariffs on us. He wants 10%. But for decades now, Canada has put onerous tariffs on the United States. And a lot of Canadians don't even know this, let alone Americans. Were you aware of how many tariffs that Canada puts on the United States to create monopolies within their own country?
I knew that I've known for a while there have been significant tariffs. In fact, it's one of the things I've focused on when having this conversation initially, and it wasn't with you guys, is the fact that there are tariffs. There's unidirectional, preventions. Like we've got a lot of goods we could replace your goods with that outside of the food stuff, because you don't want our food. It's quite polluted with chemicals and seed oils and garbage. But that's different conversation for my gardening friends out there. But we have a lot of stuff. You guys basically block. We can't have competition with your local products. And protectionism isn't unilateral. I mean, it goes both ways. So, yeah, if you're not going to play fairly in the marketplace, we're going to have a problem. You also had a trade agreement that like circumvented a lot of that garbage, so you could get access to stuff from Mexico, as our friends in Mexico know. You know, and here's the weird thing. I'm not a citizen of the world. I'm a citizen of the United States, but I'm a participant in a hemisphere where the greatest amount of good comes from. And I am not unaware of that. And that includes all of North America, the entirety of it, from Canada all the way through the US through Mexico. And if Canada could ever get a government that would be reasonable and would push out any CCP influence, uh, Mexico's already started to do that. Most of Central and South America is pushing China out with U.S. help. I mean, we got the canal back, thank goodness. You know, and look, the only ever man, geopolitics is really involved in this conversation, isn't it? But the only really initiative that China was invested in to try to seize control of the world was their Belts and Roads initiative, and then in loaning money and building ports and things for nations that certainly couldn't ever have repaid those loans. So they eventually just end up as Chinese owned things, you know, that they control. That was always a bad plan. And we built the Panama Canal. It wasn't built by Panama. So, you know, we did what stupid thing the UK did and gave Hong Kong back to the, you know, the folks in China, which never should have happened. Well, we had a 100-year lease. Well, you negotiate another 100-year lease, you know, because otherwise it's going to be Hades on Earth in Hong Kong. Same thing happened down in Panama, with China take over the, you know, of both ends of the canal. No, 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 no. Those are U.S. things. Yeah, you can hold on to it or whatever, and that's why it disturbs me that you've got Chinese contractors, security contractors working in your country. That is not positive information for me. Of course, I knew they had secret police headquarters and things in every single one of your provinces, but that might come to a surprise to some Canadians. You guys are loving the secret police in China. I mean, no, you weren't. You didn't know they were there, but goodness.
And thank you so much for your time. And I just have two more questions that I want to touch upon because right now you mentioned gardening, and I'm still very interested to know. I think gardening and knowing where your food comes and knowing how it's produced and even butchering, for example, animals, knowing that whole process is very important. But where did your interest for gardening come from, and how did it transition to even having a channel now where you talk about it?
Well, strangely enough, I watched my grandmothers cook, right? My abuelas, right? You know, I watched them cook. They were more than willing to teach the boys. Most grandmas chase you out of the kitchen. They will. You know, your aunts, your mothers. Sometimes they'll teach you, but if you take an interest in something, you usually benefit from it, and that's something that was passed on from both my grandfathers. So I had wonderful grandparents. So gardening came from my grandparents. They were one of them was a direct descendant of a dirt farmer. I think I've talked about this in private chats before, but and so one of my grandfathers who died in his 90s, I think he was 94. He was working on his brother's farm in Oregon, which he did every year, every summer. He would go to Oregon to get away from, you know, the heat, woo, and farm. And it was something he loved to do. In fact, the day he died, he'd been working on a tractor that needed some repair. And so when he went to bed that night, he got up once and then he laid back down and didn't get up again. Passed away in his sleep peacefully. So, as devastating as that was, the man left behind at least 4 or 5 gardeners because his grandchildren, not his direct children, but his grandchildren learned that stuff. I loved being able to go out and pick snow peas right off the trellis and eat them without washing them. Nothing. There was no pesticide, no chemicals, nothing. You know, and back then we didn't have a fluoridated water, so there wasn't additional chemical inputs. So I knew, you know, and now I know more. I know really how bad those chemicals can be and what it takes to do it. So I took all of that knowledge and then started stacking upon it. So my feeds are littered with gardening stuff and tips and all that other stuff, and it led me to learn more about Korean natural farming, and everything else, stuff that I should have known from the very beginning. Um, but I learned over time. And again, my knowledge base every day grows, not just obviously in my wanting to understand what's going on in Canada and around the world, but also in gardening. So I'm full up with that. So I have to thank my grandfathers for that. Like I said, it's my love of making sure I know where my food comes from. I'm making my own butter now, making homemade whole grain bread from scratch. Everything's being done now in this house. And it's not hard. It's not that hard. I mean, my tomatoes, like I can make salsa like a couple times a week between the peppers, the tomatoes, and everything else. Like everything's coming out of there. The only things I might have to supplement with are alums, which are onions, because they take so long to. It's a long time, and then you have to dry them. Do you know? It's just crazy, but no, it's something that I created a channel for, so I could pass on that knowledge, and more people could participate in knowing where their food comes from, right? Knowing what inputs are being put in. Because if you control what goes into your food, you're going to control the benefit.
And that's incredible, and I do suggest everybody go follow that garden place as well as all the other channels from Culture Casino that are down below. And we always end by asking our guests one last question, and you can answer as long or as short as you want. But what does freedom mean to you?
Oh, pretty much everything. I think that your ability to walk out into society should be no different than when a Roman citizen was able to step out into society and be unbothered. I think stepping out into the world should be an unbothered situation for everyone. You should not be challenged in your thoughts or your speech or in your path, which is why I'm dead set against overregulation, which is a problem both of our nations suffer from. All three of our nations suffer from, and I believe that I believe that I have the right to defend myself in any way I want. I believe that freedom is the embodiment of the ability to exist day to day with as limited interference as possible, and that's it.
Beautiful. Culture Casino, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today.